Hello and welcome to this 10-minute talk on, which will be a mini-series actually, two-part series on the science and art of good partnership governance. In the first of these episodes, we will today be discussing concentrated or dispersed governance. How do you strike the right balance in a partnership business? And I'm joined here today by our excellent guest speaker, David Patient. David was a former managing partner of Travers Smith, who now uses his experience as a strategic advisor to law firms and their management teams. He also represents the UK's major corporate firms on the Law Society Council, and is a senior officer on the IBA's Law Firm Management Committee. And he sits on the advisory committee of Durham University Law School, where he is an honorary fellow. And we also have my partner, Corinne Staves. Corinne is one of the leading experts on partnership, non-contentious partnership law, and Corinne advises law firms on governance, remuneration structures, M&A, and a whole host of other things. And my name is Zulon Begum, and I'm a partner at CM Murray as well. And I also advise firms on governance issues and partnership matters. So let's kick off with this session. So we are going to be talking about concentrated or dispersed governance. And as partnerships evolve and grow, governance also needs to grow with any business to adapt to its changing needs and its strategic ambitions. And often that involves the need to make more nimble decisions to be proactive in managing business risks and taking advantage of opportunities that may come across the desk of any partnership. So I'm going to start with asking David a question. How do you kind of disperse governance models? So that's where, in a traditional partnership, partners basically get around the table and decide things from day to day. Can that model work in practice depending on the size of the business? And what stage as you grow do you think a firm needs to consider more delegated decision making?
Well, thanks, Zulon. I think clearly the dispersed governance model can work. You need to have a thread of consistency through it and oversight. Much will obviously depend on, as you say, the size and shape of a law firm, its geographical spread, and that could be international or simply domestic, spread across a number of locations in the UK. I think I would generally say that in order to get things done properly, as soon as a group of partners, you're more than able just to sit round a small table to discuss things, then you really need to be thinking about delegating. Even in a small organisation, you need obviously to be able to act when people aren't there. Someone could be away, ill, on holiday, on leave, at a client meeting, and so on and so forth. So I think that even in a relatively small organisation, and definitely in big organisations, you need to have an element of delegation to the management functions from the partnership. And by the management functions, I mean probably the managing partner, but also the C-suite that's working alongside the managing partner, a CEO, a COO, a CPO, a CTO, all of these people. They need to have clear ability to be able to take their own decisions, reporting probably back up to the managing partner. At what point you need to go to the next level will vary from firm to firm and from organisation to organisation. But we live in very fast-moving times and quite a VUCA world at the moment. So I think all organisations of whatever size need to have well-established systems and processes which allow them to act to deal with any situation which may arise, whether that's cyber, whether that's a conduct or reputational issue, whether that's reacting to some significant outside event, conflict, another pandemic, heaven forbid. Clearly, we were all taken to an extent by surprise at the way in which the pandemic evolved in relation to our own businesses. But I think that a lot of firms had actually got themselves fairly well prepared by the time we went into that awful first lockdown, and were ready to react. And I think that once we got through that first few weeks of difficulty, it was evident that firms were in a place where they could respond well to the difficulty of operating, which you wouldn't have imagined maybe even 3 months before.
In terms of, obviously, the pandemic was a huge test of governance structures in many law firms. And if you were to look into your crystal ball and say, well, what's on the horizon? What do you think the next test might be that firms should be considering kind of preparing for in terms of their governance?
I suspect there are a number, but probably for me, the one that I would be focused on, if I was just going to pick one at this point and have it highest up on the agenda, is just how firms are going to react to the evolution of AI over the coming years. I think, there's been a lot of heat and a little less light in that area so far, but clearly things are going to change dramatically, and firms need to be attentive and be prepared for what will come steadily and slowly down the line.
Yeah, and that, of course, kind of presents both the risks and opportunities. So that's a really interesting one to think about. I'm going to come on to you next, Corinne, because I'd like you to kind of drill down into the types of governance structures that you see and put in place to ensure that there are kind of appropriate checks and balances where decision making is delegated.
Of course, and it's a big topic. I think probably just as a starting remark, I wanted just to say that we'll use lots of terms during this discussion about various committees, management committees, managing partners, senior partners, CEO, CEOs. You gave us all the initials already, didn't you, David? But in firms that are usually structured as LLPs, it is literally a personal choice. There is no sort of formal management structure, unlike a company which has a pre sort of formed board concept. So firms can choose their own labels and they can design their own structures to make sure they're achieving their objectives. So with that sort of disclaimer on the terminology that we're using, I think what a firm that's decided it needs a more comprehensive governance structure needs to be doing is identifying what it's looking to achieve, what structure will achieve those objectives, and what it usually involves is some kind of top governance structure. That might be a board or some kind of executive. In the smaller firms, it might be a managing partner or a managing partner and senior partner operating together, CEO and CFO, something like that. And then often, and again, as the size is growing, or indeed if the firm is more dispersed, you might see committees underlying that. And they might be sort of subject committees, for example, audit committees, disciplinary committees, conduct committees. There might be remuneration committees. Sometimes there might be supervisory committees. Again, it sort of depends on what as a business is important or needed within that particular structure. There might be below that or alongside that another sort of set of what you might consider committees, or you might just say a part of the sort of the fabric of the firm in terms of groups of heads of departments, or indeed, let's think about international firms. You might say that actually the France board or the Germany board is a sort of a subcommittee in its own right, with responsibilities to report up to, say, the Europe board, and then the Europe board reports up to kind of HQ. So again, you can see that you have to look at the specifics of the individual firm to work out what committees and sort of subcommittees and structure you need to achieve your specific objectives. In terms of what each of them should be doing, again, it depends on your firm. But I think that a really important thing is working out what your objectives are, whether your objectives are likely to be met. I think that you need really clear reporting lines. I think you need to have a really clear sense of where responsibilities start and stop, so you don't end up with overlap or duplication, but equally and probably more importantly, you don't end up with gaps. You need to make sure that there's accountability, and there might even be sort of elements of supervision depending on how the governance structure particularly works. So sort of building that all together and finding something that's efficient and delivers efficiency as compared to what went before, but assuring all of those particular features is no easy thing, but I think most firms find a way.
I'm quite interested in some firms, and they tend to be on the larger end of the scale, where they split executive and strategic responsibilities. I mean, what do you both think about that? Do you think that it's good to have a split in those kind of key responsibilities, or is it okay for a board to assume both executive and strategic role?
I'm sure David's got some really interesting insights from a sort of commercial perspective, but as a boring lawyer, I would say work out what it is you're trying to do. If you genuinely have them performing different functions and working sort of symbiotically with each other, brilliant, bring it on. But if nobody quite knows who's doing what, and you haven't got the skill sets that you need within those committees, then I would question whether they're doing what they should do.
Yeah, I think that's right, Corinne. I mean, it will depend on the size of the organisation, clearly, Zulon. Personally, I would try and keep it all together. Actually, I would say that the board's responsibility, whilst holding to the fire, if you like, the feet of the managing partner who's performing the executive function, their responsibility is really to be looking forward and to be strategic, feeding off obviously probably the direction that the managing partner, their C-suite are sort of guiding the firm down. I mean, I think one point to add, Corinne, to your point about the various committees, I mean, you can over-committee, and so you need to be a bit careful about that. You don't just want to have a committee for the sake of having a committee, because they can take up an enormous amount of time. So I think you need to keep that thing continually under review. Clearly, they need to know what they're doing, as you say. For me, I think it's really important that is emphasised by having proper terms of references for committee, which are continuously reviewed to ensure they are still, fulfilling the right purpose.
That's a really good point. Thank you, David. And obviously those kind of points by both of you are around the kind of science of putting together structures to meet the specific objectives of a business. But obviously, as the title of the overarching title of this series is around both the science and the art. And David, you were involved in the arts of management for many years. So it would be good to get your kind of thoughts on how, what is the art of maintaining the trust and confidence in management teams, especially where they can have quite wield a high degree of power within a partnership?
Well, I don't think there are any dark arts, really. I think it's relatively straightforward. I think that leaders need to be what I would call highly visible. They need to have an ability to communicate well and do it. They need to have a strong team of business professionals around them. And they obviously need to be trusted and ultimately, hopefully, respected. Now, getting to that point does need to be earned. So in order to achieve that, I think you need to deliver on what you say you're going to do. Maybe that's in your manifesto. Don't come along to your partners with any big surprises unless you absolutely have to. At the same time, some people will think it's a surprise, even though you've communicated 4 or 5 times to them that you are doing this. You have to keep communicating to people down every channel available. I think, it can be lonely at the top, but if you get some internal supporters and cheerleaders around you who can help you disseminate, what you're trying to achieve. But at the same time, you need to avoid having favourites. You need to try and bring everyone along with you and treat everyone equally. What you have to remember is that that it's not a popularity contest, and you need to keep people on side, but you also need to be prepared to have those difficult conversations, to make those difficult decisions, and you need to stand up to people. But I always thought that you only want to fight the fights that are worth fighting. You have a certain amount of political capital as in a leadership role, which is very easy to disseminate, but very hard to accumulate. Delegate, bring people along with you. Ultimately, I think the most successful leaders who are the most trusted, and in whom your partners will have confidence, are those people with strong EQ and people skills.
That's really interesting. Thank you, David. I'm sure lots of people will find lots to chew over in that. And my last question to you is to Corinne, really. Obviously, you can do your best to craft the right structures as far as you can within the constraints of your business and your partnership, but sometimes things can go wrong. And if things do go wrong, are there any kind of safety valves that you can build into your constitutions to address the issues if something does fall apart?
It's a really good question. I think so much relies on those art points that David was highlighting, because that goes a bit further in terms of it overlaps with the constitution. For example, if you are in management, having the confidence that the partners support whatever you are putting them. So having sort of made sure that you've won over hearts and minds before putting issues to a vote, because the last thing you want is for a vote not to pass if it's a divisive issue, for example, because that can become a sort of a vote of confidence. So that there is a science side to it, but this is still a point where the art of being a good leader comes into play. If it all has completely fallen apart, and in terms of let's think about how to protect the firm in those circumstances and the partner's interests, I think you do need some key provisions. For example, if you appoint or elect, say, a managing partner, a CEO, or board members, then you need to make sure you've got strong provisions which enable them not just to retire, but also to have them be removed, including without cause, because sometimes it's a bad feeling that they've sort of got things a bit wrong rather than something really egregious, but where they have lost the confidence of the firm. I think that there should be scope really to scrutinise the decisions that are made by those management functions, by those managing bodies, whether it's a higher management function or whether it's putting out a decision to the partner to ratify it or to reject it, and deciding what the implications are. I generally don't like sort of appeal processes as a rule, because I think they can cause as much trouble as they fix. But that's sort of what I mean in terms of making sure you've got those checks and balances. I also think that there are some softer ways of having those safety valves. For example, making sure that partner KPIs for the management and officers of the firm, they link performance to things like compensation and deliverables. So it's very clear that their performance is judged on how they're discharging their management roles. It's not just another thing you do as well as being a client partner. You can't say, oh, well, it's just about billings. If you're a full-time manager, you have to have KPIs that recognise success and also enable the firm to identify where there are shortcomings that need to be addressed in good time, rather than waiting for it to all fall apart and say, oh, well, we didn't really have a mechanism to deal with this.
Those are really excellent points. Thank you, Corinne. And that brings us to the end of our first session on this mini-series on the science and art of good partnership governance. Do watch out for our second session, which will be out in a few weeks. And that will be on representation, enfranchisement, rotation and independence. Is that the secret sauce to good governance? That is a bit of a mouthful, but I promise you it's going to be interesting. So we hope you will join us. Thank you all, and goodbye.